policies that seem to be against the interest and will of the people, supported by politicians. And you could look at the history. You could count these wars into that. You could count the lockdown policies over the last couple of years. Some of the most reckless fiscal policy imaginable. Politicians have always been reckless with fiscal policy, but never on this level. And I feel like we've crossed the Rubicon on that front. And I don't know how we turn back from that. You look at some of the woke agenda, you look at the defarming policies throughout Europe, and you're like, what? It just seems like too much. It seems like too much all at once. And what the heck is going on here? So I'm assuming this is what you're referring to when you say there's destabilization practices that are very curious at a civil level as well.
Yeah. And if we study the concept of divide et impera, or divide and conquer, a bit more deeply, the idea is to, when you try to establish a foreign control of a country, nation, you find at least two groups and you feed them against each other, and then you let the whole thing fall apart. Romans were very good at this when they created their imperium. And this is happening now everywhere. So I think it's just the chaos is the aim here. And you mentioned all those policies. Like, for example, lockdowns. We were the second forecasting agency in the world who warned of the risk of global pandemic publicly on the 30th of January 2020. And it came. And I was the first one in Finland basically demanding for lockdowns. Because I saw what was happening in China. Now I question whether it was so bad as it looked in Wuhan, but it was really, really bad when it came. And it makes absolutely no sense that China closed or stopped domestic flights, but you could still fly out of China. And I was like, what? It doesn't make any sense. But anyway, when the lockdowns came, I was like, we need to lock down. But then in July, when we saw the cost, I said, never again. This doesn't work, never again. I wrote, publicly demanded 500 million, with a billion, which is kind of a large sum in Finland, 500 million for agriculture support, 500 million for healthcare. None of those came. So if you want to prepare for a pandemic, you make sure that you have food. And then you make sure that, the health system has all the resources it needs. None of this happened. Instead, they kept locking down. And they even tried in the middle of winter, was in the end of February, they tried to push for a curfew. Like, it was a heavy winter in Finland. Like in Helsinki, the streets were empty. Why do you need a curfew? You need a curfew. You need these, like, insane, they were not laws. They were kind of, what's the word? Well, anyway, the government instructions surpassing constitution. I think this was the whole point of these lockdowns, was an attack on constitutions, so that you could, and constitution are the ones who protect us ordinary people from the tyranny of the rulers. This is basically how constitutions have always. This is the very basic thing of constitution. If you break it, let's say that just with prime minister saying we need to do this, and the parliament accepting, it's not. No, it will play in the laws of us. So I think once again, when you look at these things, this chaos, and then the defarming thing is just completely insane, and blaming cows on the climate change, which is, I don't think it's really happening. I have made a 100 on that also. But if you look at all these, it's really hard to come to any other conclusion that the divide et impera principle everywhere. And then when you look at that, they are pushing these digital IDs, central bank digital currencies, which is the most dangerous thing, the most horrifying thing in economics I have ever seen. You look at these and they make no sense. They don't increase our security. They just increase control. And one thing, I have friends in European central banks. And what I hear from the senior economists is that no one thinks central bank digital currency is a good idea. But when you go to the top level, to the brass, to the Lagarde and all that, all of a sudden it becomes a policy we should strive for. So the senior economists do not agree what the leadership of central banks in Europe are proposing for. What is this? It's just completely politically driven idea. And then we need to ask again, why? And with central bank digital currency, you would establish a massive control over the monetary system with two conditions: cash gone and very few banks left. Mm-hmm. So as long as you have regional banking system in the US, you are relatively safe, but we're in Europe are not anymore. So, tying this all together, of course, there's a lot of topics we could cover, like the whole woke thing and all that. But you just need to look at these very few things what are happening, and you can also see that if there is not a plan, this is the biggest kind of strange random thing ever happened. Once again, Occam's razor. It's not reasonable to assume that these are the stupid people acting stupidly at the same time. No, there's systematic error in policy making, and it directly implies there's a plan.
Mm. I just have to mention this because it struck me. You've mentioned 3 times now that you did a 180 in your thinking on a pretty substantial topic, one being the war in Europe, the second being lockdowns, and then you kind of hinted maybe something similar occurred in your line of thinking with climate change. And I just have to commend you because it's rare that I speak with somebody who is so transparently honest. And I think we all think this way. We are given the initial information, we develop a thesis. As the situation changes and new information becomes available, we should change our thinking. Most people just reflect on, I always knew it in hindsight, right? In hindsight, we're all geniuses, right?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, but I really appreciate your humility and honesty there and your realness with those topics.
Yeah, thank you. But it actually, I'm the greatest job in the world considering this, because we do forecasts. We have to understand what's going on to be able to forecast. We don't have the luxury of putting our agendas on the forecast. No, we want to understand what can happen so we can serve our clients and the world. Yeah. So I go where the data leads. I'm an unyielding empiricist. So I do this one. If suddenly, everything changes around, then we go that way. But what worries me is that our forecasts on the escalation in the Middle East and Ukraine, based on the assumption there's this escalationary force, they are the most powerful ones on our scenarios. That's where we are heading. It is deeply troublesome, because then it leads to just one conclusion, that there is actually this group or whatever controlling these major developments. Well, I've been doing these worst case scenarios for, 15 years. I have the ability to switch off, but this is the one thing. If one thing keeps me awake at night, this is the thing.